Hey, so random video, and do forgive me because this is completely unscripted, but I recently came across this book, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, and I just thought it was incredible. And of course, it's already a classic. Millions of people have read it. Apparently, tons of people read it in school, but I never did. And it was one of those books that I'd heard of, but never actually read. And so in the last few years, I've been trying to read a lot more quote unquote classic books. So earlier, I think this year, or perhaps towards the end of last year, I read Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, and I've read Wuthering Heights. I've read a bunch of these books that loads of people have read, and I just happened to never have read, and I loved them. But this, I first listened to as an audiobook just a few weeks ago, and it was amazing, and I knew that I had to have it, so I bought the paperback. And I have this exercise that I do, this thing that I do, which is called copywriting. So essentially, I just take great books, any great book that I come across, and I will pick a chapter or a sequence of pages, and I'll write it out by hand. So you'll see, I'll give you a little bit of page ASMR here, but loads of books that I've written out by hand here. So this is How You Lose the Time War, and then here we have A Handmaid's Tale, I think, and what else is there? Norwegian Wood. So you can see I just go through a bunch of books, any books that I find good or interesting, and I'll just write them out by hand. And it's a meditative practice, and I'm a writer myself, and it helps me to think about how great writers write. And, as I look at each passage, as I write out, I'm literally, I have the two books open, my notebook and the original book, and I'm writing out sentence by sentence, and I'm thinking about what thoughts go into each sentence and why certain things sound and feel the way that they do. And this was so good. I was doing it yesterday, and I just thought, why don't I make a video? Just because I think it's the kind of thing that if you've never really spent much time doing it, you probably don't appreciate what makes some of these classics so good. And there's a lot that can easily fly under the surface and be unrealized. And the first scene of this book that I want to read to you now is so brilliant. I want to read it out and then just tell you some of the things that I notice that make it resonate with me a lot. So, Fahrenheit 451. This is the first bit. There's no real chapters in here, at least not in the copy that I have, but there are breaks between the scenes, so you kind of know where to stop. Okay, so and what I'll do is I'll read maybe a few sentences, and then I'll go back and talk through the things that I noticed. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. Wow, that is an incredible first two sentences. The first, it was a pleasure to burn, really grips you. It asks a question, what are we talking about here? Where are we going? Who's burning? Am I the one burning? Are we the ones burning? Or are we doing the burning, right? It was a pleasure to burn. That just takes you in. And then the next two sentences, there are a lot that happens. The first, this next one, you're going to see like a 3-part structure, which is very common. So it was a pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. Again, interesting. There's emphasis. There's italicization on the word changed there. And then with the brass nozzle in his fist, you're going to notice both in this segment that I've just read out, and then you're going to see it reoccurring through some of the next sentences. It's not really personification, but it's kind of going between, sometimes he will give agency to objects, and then sometimes he is ascribing things to the object, and there's a slight difference. And then also in this entire sequence, you're going to see body parts being brought up one by one, sentence by sentence. So you will see in this sentence, So first, with the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. You see how, first of all, we're talking about his fists, and then we're assuming that the hose is the great python, but you can see how it's an animal, right? It's not a metaphor. He's not saying, oh, it was like a great python, like a simile. He's saying, this is the great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. Then we go back to him, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor. So you see, we've gone from his fists to his head to his hands, and we go on and on. And then there's this sequence that I really love here. So his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning. So here you're going to get a few B's, blazing and burning to bring. But then sequentially, there's also the rhythm in the word choice here, where you get the enunciation on the second part of either a word with two syllables or the second word of two short words. So I'll read this part out again. So, of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. That sequence, you feel the rhythm. And so it has this effect. You'll also notice that was a very long sentence, and each of those three sentences that I just read get longer and longer each time. It's almost like a pyramid. It draws you in, and now you're in the story and you're wondering what's happening. So it was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. Right? That's the second, almost like a bracket. You're being drawn in. Then, with the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. Wow. Now you're feeling it. Now that I've called attention to those few things, we're really getting it. And there's another thing you're going to see that he does a few times. We'll get to it later, but just keep an eye on where he says his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor. So his hands were the hands. Okay. So let's keep going. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. So, a few things there. One, red and yellow and black. Again, you have that three-part structure. Second, you see maybe now what I mean when I'm talking about how he jumps between whether the objects are things in themselves and whether the objects are merely given some human action. So I'll give you the example. So when he talks about the helmet, it's his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head. But when he talked about the hose before, it was this great python, right? It's not his hose, it's not his great python, it's not him holding the thing. The great python has agency, it's its own thing. The great python is spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. And then come back to his eyes, for example, his eyes all orange flame, right? It's not the flame reflecting in his eyes are orange flame. Then the house jumped up. So again, it's not the fire jumped up and consumed the house jumped up in a gorging fire. That again is interesting, right? The house isn't going anywhere, it's the fire coming upon the house, but that's how he writes it. And so you have this kind of bounce back between when the object is a thing and when we simply give the object things to do. Hopefully you get what I mean when I describe that difference. But it's the difference between like how he describes the helmet and then how he describes the eyes, and then back to how he describes the house, and the same with the hose. So the hose is the great python, the house jumps up. So again, these things build one on the other. And again, like I mentioned, you have that first sequence of the first three sentences where each is longer than the last, and it has this sense of drawing you in, right? It was a pleasure to burn. It's short, simple. Now you want to read the next sentence. The next sentence then has two commas. Oh, sorry, one comma. So it has the first half and the second half. It was a pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. Then the third sentence has three commas, and it's incredibly long. Each segment gets longer and longer, so you're being drawn in. Really, really good. Then by the time you get to this next sentence, again, we're doing the same, but then you notice in each segment, we're going to a different part of the body, and we are giving animation to a different object. So we start with his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next. He flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies, and again, short sentence. So you see we have this shape. We start with a sentence. Both of those two sentences, the very first one and this one we just read, are probably about five, 6 words. And so you start with a short sentence. You build out into these long sentences segmented with commas, and then you close with a very short sentence, which again is very evocative. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. Again, obviously, these are not real fireflies. They're talking about the embers of the flame. But you see how by giving this agency and these human qualities, in a sense, to all these different objects, you get the sense that everything is alive, right? The hose is a snake. His eyes are orange flame. The house jumps. The evening sky is red and yellow and black. He's walking through a swarm of fireflies. And I think I mentioned it a bit before, but you're going to see in quite a few sequences here, he's using repetition of similar letters or similar rhythms and beats. So before we had blazing and burning to bring down the tatters. So again, you've got the rhythm and you've also got all of those B's sequentially. Then here we have, we've got the red and yellow and black. And then we're going to get to some more here. So he strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Beautiful. Oh, I'm loving this. And there's a few things here. So, let's just start from the beginning. First of all, why does it mention the old joke? Because this is not, I'm not recognizing what the joke is. And obviously because of where the commas are placed, the joke refers only to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace. That's what the joke is, because after that it says, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house. So the joke is just about this. It's referencing, oh, there's some old joke. Like the old joke, he wanted above all to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace. I don't know what joke that is, but I think the key part here, you didn't need to say that. You could just say that's what he wanted to do. But it calls attention to perhaps he has some sense of humor, right? Perhaps there is, it's adding some layers here. So he wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace. And then here, we're going to get to some really interesting bits. While the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house. Again, this personification. The flapping pigeon-winged books. Obviously, you could just say the flapping books, but the flapping pigeon-winged books, adds to that. And then here, this part, love it. Just like we talked about with the B's in that previous sequence, here we have the W's. So, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Whoa, right? While the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away, you're getting this sense of something almost evaporating. You feel the rising, right? With the word choice here, you feel that rising as you read it. And then one thing, I'll mention it now because we've now had a few instances of it and I didn't mention it before, but you're going to notice in a lot of these sentences, there is a rising and falling of tension. So I'll just read this sentence again, and then I'll show you a few other sentences where we've already seen it. While the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Can you see the rising and falling? The with burning right at the end brings the tone down. Before, we were building up and up and up as each words built on top of each other, and then we end with burning. I'll give you some previous sentences where the exact same thing happened. Right from the beginning, it was a pleasure to burn. The last two words, sorry. It was a pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. Again, right at the end, and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. Again, of history, right at the end. Then, with his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head and his eyes all orange flame, with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. Again, build up the tension. All of these are run-on sentences, broken up by commas, and then we end with two hard words and black. Then, he strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house. While the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. You're seeing it. All of these things build upon each other and make this really engaging, right? You've got within each sentence, you've got the rising and falling. Then the sentences build upon each other. You've got the shape of short sentences leading to longer ones, leading to shorter ones. All of that keeps you engaged, keeps you going. Then, Montague grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. Two things there. One, remember what I mentioned before? His hands were the hands of some amazing conductor. Now we're going to see this a few times again now. Now he grinned the fierce grin. So that's another thing to note. Then, again, we have this. It's not quite alliteration, but it's a resonance of sound, right? He grinned the fierce grin of all men singed. Again, we've got this repetition of the sounds. And driven back by flame. And then also note the ending. Of all men singed and driven back by flame. Hard ending there. Always two words. That sequence always works. He keeps coming back to it. So that works really well. Another thing, I'll save it after we read this next sequence. So, Montague grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man burnt corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never, ever went away, as long as he remembered. Again, just really awesome, really gripping. And that's pretty much the end of the first sequence. So let's just go back over that last part and tie some of these themes back to the beginning. So again, we have we're noting very similar things. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse, he might wink at himself, a minstrel man burnt corked in the mirror. We've got that sequence of each sentence. And then similarly, later going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile gripped by his face muscles in the dark. The dark. It never went away, that smile. It never, ever went away as long as he remembered. And there, remembered by itself is the closing note because it has multiple syllables. The previous ones are two words with short syllables, usually. And so you can have that with just two short words. But here, remembered by itself brings you to the conclusion of the sentence. So it does the work. Then, what we've already noted, we're going to see this, we've seen this a few times. We saw before, his hands were the hands. Then he grinned the fierce grin. Then he would feel the fiery smile. And again, we've got these F's, feel the fiery smile. So we've got that little sibilance there, combined with this thing that we've noticed. He grinned the fierce grin. He felt the fiery smile. The smile itself is fierce. The grin itself is fierce. Oh, sorry. The smile itself is fiery. The grin itself is fierce. But there's another thing you notice with both of these two last uses of that, which I don't think apply to the first. Yes. Starting with the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. When you give those properties to the grin itself, it tells you that it's almost involuntary. Right? It's not just that he grinned. It's that he grinned the grin of all men that do this thing. Everyone that does this thing, this happens to them. It contorts them. It changes them. And then you see that repeated again with he feels the fiery smile. And again, it's almost like his emotions are being taken from him by this action, this thing that he's doing, this burning. The burning has its own life, right? When you go back, you hear the great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. The house jumps with fire. The fire almost seems to steal the embodiment of anything it interacts with. So it's not that he grinned, it's that he grins the fierce grin of all men that do this thing. And it's not that he smiled, but he is the one feeling the fiery smile. The fiery smile is happening to him. And then it doubles down by, he would feel the fiery smile gripped by his face muscles. Again, it's almost like he's being held hostage by this action that he's taking. It's really interesting. So the fiery smile is gripping his face muscles. He is not voluntarily smiling. It's a tightness, right? It's gripping his face muscles. It's pulling. It's tension. That, again, really interesting. And then it ends, that sentence. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile gripped by his face muscles in the dark. So again, we have that ending to the sentence, but just adding that again really emphasizes the abstraction that this is not him, right? It's almost like a horror scene, right? The fiery smile gripping his face muscles, gripped by his face muscles, in the dark. And then the last sentence, it never went away, that smile. It never, ever went away as long as he remembered. So, what a cracking first scene. I love it so much. And that draws you into the book. It makes you want to read the rest. And the book is long. Not super long, it's not super thick, but it does enough. Just in that short sequence of sentences to keep you reading, to keep you interested. And you'll notice it hasn't really told you much. It hasn't really told you much about Montauk. We now know his name, this man. We kind of know what he's doing. He's burning, but it doesn't tell you much about anything else, right? He's burning, he's in a house. There are flapping pigeon-winged books, so you get the sense that he's burning the house and the books. But you don't know why. But then you also get this sense that two senses. One is that he's doing something that's beyond him, right? Because he's grinning the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He's doing something that's part of a wider thing. All men that do this thing have this grin, right? It's a characteristic of the people that do this thing. The people are changed by the action. Then you have the fiery smile gripped by his face muscles. So again, it's this sense of grabbing, right? This sense of, something intrinsic to him is being snatched by this action that he's taking. And so all of that just happens in this very first scene. And, what do we get from it? We get the sensation of a fire, some fire being alive. It's stealing the action and the agency from all the objects it interacts with, right? It becomes the great python. And then also you noticed, and we mentioned before, just the enunciation of, there's this balance of the actions that interact with fire having their own agency, and then everything else touches some part of his body. So you have the brass nozzle in his fists, his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, his eyes all orange flame. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. And then I think there was a sequence here where you just note, I think, yeah, just the balance between he does these things, him, and then the fire is jumping, the house is jumping, the fire's doing this, his eyes are orange flame. There's almost this separation between, okay, there's some things that he's doing, but most of the things that he does, apart from he strode, where is that? He strode in a swarm of fireflies. Most of them are static, right? He's just holding something. He's just doing something, and everything else is happening to him, even though he's taking the action. But almost none of the other actions that he takes carry their own agency. The agency belongs to the other thing. So even when he grins, it's not his grin. It's the fierce grin of all men that are singed and driven back by flame. It's the grin belongs to all the men, right? The smile is gripped by his face muscles. It's not his smile, right? And so you have that continuous sense there that something is happening to this man, something outside of his control. Even though he feels like he's doing it, there is something compelling him or controlling him, something outside of him. And we haven't even got to the heart of the story. And obviously when you read the rest of the story, you understand why, and you see all those themes brought out, but you get it right from that very first scene. And that's why I love it. That's why I had to buy the paperback of the book. And yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to share. I think it is awesome. It was a really great book, really great read. I hope many more of you read it. If you never came across this book like me, in school or anywhere else, I can see why it's a classic. And there are so many more great sequences like that I'd love to share, but I just thought this beginning, this opening, was really something special. And I just wanted to share, that's what I was writing about. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about when I'm doing this practice of writing out sentence by sentence and noticing what I notice, especially because I want to improve my own writing. And so I'd also recommend you guys try some of this as well. If you want to improve your writing, it works equally for fiction and non-fiction. Take something someone has wrote, write it out sentence by sentence, and try and understand the structure and why certain things work. Look at the words, and if you notice a rhythm, if you notice a sensation that's happening to you as you're reading it, try and pick apart and understand what words created that sensation, what words evoked that action, how do these sentences within themselves, and also how within the structure of a paragraph, how do all these different pieces interact with each other. And you'll notice a lot, and all of that will help to improve your writing. So that's all I wanted to share. Thanks for spending this time with me, and happy reading.